How are you doing today, guys? So today I'm going to film a really quick care video for my Phelsuma grandis, which is a giant day gecko. This care does overlap for other day gecko species, although there are some differences. So if you do have a different day gecko species, you're going to want to look into their care specifically. I'm going to write a little more detailed care sheet on my website, as well as going to provide an infographic just to make it a little easier to run down the care. So this is just going to be very basic, and we're going to run through some of the major points. The first thing we're going to look at is the actual terrarium itself. So this is one of the classic front opening 18 by 18 by 24 inch tall Exoterra terrarium. I would say this is about the minimum size you want for an adult. If you watched my DIY chameleon cage video, you'll know that I did have this gecko in a larger cage for a while, and honestly I think it was slightly too big. It wasn't quite twice the size of this, but it was nearly that, and she just didn't utilize the space. She was constantly hiding, and maybe I could have added some more decor to help her out, but I think she's much more comfortable in this space. Day geckos are arboreal, so you do want height. They don't spend any time on the ground, really. You won't find them down there, so having some ability for them to climb is great. Of course, day geckos are very, very flighty, so you do want to have some places for them to hide, lots of trees, or lots of leaves. Everyone always recommends putting some bamboo stock in. It's true, they do love the bamboo. They always hide in it, or at least mine does. I think a lot do. You can't actually see her right now because day geckos are very flighty. Let's see if I can find her. She's in the back. We can't see her. I'm going to cut in some more shots of her through the video so you guys can actually see her, so there's proof that I do own one. In terms of the actual plants, I use this golden pothos plants. These things are great. They're incredibly hardy. They grow like weeds. Basically, I have them in my crested gecko terrarium as well. They help raise the humidity, and they just add a nice touch. And they do keep the actual terrarium slightly bioactive, so I don't really have to clean it that much besides cleaning the glass. And so for the actual soil, you can kind of see down here I do have the clay balls for a drainage layer, as well as a screen just to separate that from my eco-earth. So I use eco-earth as substrate. And then you can kind of see on top here is this Exoterra. It's called forest floor, I think. I'll post a link and it's just kind of this chippy type stuff. I thought it looked nice, so I put it in there. And it does hold the humidity relatively well. So for lighting, lighting is very important. Of course, day geckos are, as their name suggests, diurnal, which means they do require UVB to produce the proper vitamin D, so they don't get metabolic bone disease. So I have this cheap little cardboard thing up here, but I'll show you guys. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera because it's really bright. So I actually have two bulbs. This one's not a UVB producing bulb. It's just a compact fluorescent that's not even showing up on camera. But then in the back, I do have just a tube fluorescent. I use the Reptile 5.0 UVB bulb. You can use the 10.0 as well. I believe the only difference is how close you can get the bulb to the animal. So mine's only within 12 inches or so. So the 5.0 is perfectly fine. If you do need if it's a little more space between the light and the animal itself, you can go with the 10.0. I like these bulbs. They work well. I do replace them every year because their UVB does eventually fade away. So I use this spot bulb here to shine onto that bamboo. That is just a 50-watt bulb, just like this is an Exoterra Sun Glow. I use a 50-watt. I probably could use a 25-watt as well. What you want to do is you want to create a hot spot of about 90 to 92 degrees. So I have my heat bulb shining down onto this stick of bamboo. And then what I do is I can use my temperature gun to measure it. So it's right around 91, 92. There was a spot here that said 93. So that's really good. And the way I control that is through just an outlet dimmer. So right there is a dimmer. That's what the actual heat bulb is plugged into. And this little gray switch here, I just bought this from IKEA. You can order them off of Amazon as well. They're super cheap. The gray switch is just a toggle, and if I slide it up and down, it changes the brightness of this bulb. I'm not going to do it right now because it's going to mess up my settings. but it's the best way to control the temperature of the bulb. So I won't, like I said, a 25 watt part probably would have been enough, but now since I can control it, it's not a big deal. So that brings us to temperature. So obviously you want a hot spot of around 90 to 92 degrees, and then the rest of the enclosure during the day should have a heat gradient of roughly 75 to 80 degrees. That's perfectly fine. The day geckos will self-regulate their temperature. And at nighttime, obviously the bulbs turn off, and I let the terrarium drop down to the low 70s. So 72, 73 is perfectly fine. I often see day gecko care guides that they require higher temperatures, like 80 at night or something like that. That's just not true. The temperatures in Madagascar definitely drop into the 70s or even the 60s at night, so they can definitely handle that. That's not a problem.
So since day geckos don't exclusively eat insects in the wild, they will readily eat non-moving food, meaning they will eat crested gecko powder and they'll lick up honey and fruit. There's many other types of geckos in the world that won't respond to food that doesn't move, but day geckos will readily eat a food like that. So crested gecko diet has really come a long way in the last 10 years. So brands like Pangea or Repashy, they are really good. They are a really complete meal. And I've even seen some breeders start to market day geckos as an insect-free animal, meaning that you could buy it and raise it up and live its whole life without feeding its insects. I don't know if that's necessarily something that you should do. I do think there's a lot of enrichment that comes from feeding insects, and that way the gecko can hunt. But I do feed my gecko a lot of crested gecko diet. She doesn't eat most insects. She was purchased from a breeder at 4 years old, and she had been pretty much raised off of Repashy food exclusively, and most feeder insects she will leave on the bottom of her terrarium. She doesn't like them at all. She will eat phoenix worms, so I do feed her those on a semi-regular basis. But I will show you how I generally prepare her normal meal. So your day gecko should be fed every 2 or 3 days. They don't need to be fed every day, and you can mix up how you want to feed them. So maybe one day is insects, and maybe a couple days later or 3 days later you do some Pangea food. But those two types of foods should be the staple, with fruit and honey being sort of a treat for once in a while. So I'll quickly show you how I prepare the Pangea food. So this is the Pangea food I use. This is Pangea fruit mix complete with insects. So this is a great powder because it does have some fruit within it, but it also is made with black soldier fly insect protein, which is basically phoenix worm protein. My gecko really loves this food, and this is a complete food. She could live off this 100% of her life, although, like I said, it does remove the enrichment factor of hunting insects, which I think is really important. So the recipe is really easy. It's a 1-to-1 water to powder ratio. So we just throw this into the bowl, and then once in a while I have a bunch of frozen bananas in my freezer that are just already pre-sliced, and I will take a tiny piece of that and mix it in. Really, it's just for flavor, but it also tends to keep the powder congealed a little bit better. It doesn't dry out as fast, and she likes it just as much. So, and then nice cold fresh water, and mix it in. So then we stir it up until it's nice and thick. And then we can go give it to her.
And of course, the last bit of sort of basic care is the humidity. So the humidity should be roughly between 50 and 80%. What I do is I use this Exoterra Mister. I like these. They make your wrists a lot easier on your wrists than a normal spray bottle. I'll do this 1 to 2 days, or sort of 1 to 2 times a day, depending on the time of year. If it's winter and it's a little more dry, I'll do it maybe twice. Or if I notice she's going into shed. So just give it a really good mist. I try to spray the soil as well to just make it hold humidity. Of course, day geckos will drink water off the leaves and off the glass. That's how they do not use water bowls, or at least I haven't noticed using a water bowl. They'll drink out of off the leaves. So give it a good mist, and that's good. And then of course, it's important to let it dry out between. It doesn't need to be soaking wet all the time. Just give her 1 or 2 of those a day, and that's perfectly fine. All right, so that's really the basics for giant day gecko care. The last, I guess, little bits of information is one, the females get to about 8 to 10 inches in length, and the males roughly an inch or 2 bigger. They live anywhere between 6 and 20 years. So that's quite a long span. I think average the day gecko will live about 10 years. Of course, I'm always trying to push it to the upper limits because in captivity they really should theoretically live a long time as long as they don't develop any illnesses or anything like that. And the very last piece is handling. I don't recommend handling your day geckos at all. I've never handled this gecko, and I most likely never will unless I have to for some strange reason. Not only do these geckos drop their tails like a lot of geckos do, but they also have a defense mechanism where they'll shed their skin. And it's not like a normal shed, like when they would normally go through the shed cycle. It comes off in thick sort of flakes almost, and it takes them right down to this very like sub level of skin. And if you look up pictures on Google, you'll see, and it's almost like the inside of their body you're seeing. So it doesn't kill them necessarily, but it does open up a big wound, and now you're dealing with possible infection and things like that. So these are flighty animals. They're not comfortable being held. Like if I walk past when she's basking or something, quite often she'll skitter off into the corner because they tend to be flighter geckos. So try not to handle them if you can avoid it. If you do have any other questions, please put them in the comments below. I do have a link to my website. I have way more detail on day gecko care there as well as a infographic. So if it's something that you might want to print out and you can have by the terrarium if you're a new user and it can just, or a new owner, and you can use that to guide your care for the first little while until you get the hang of it. But anyway, if you like the video, give it a like, and thanks a lot for watching. Talk to you later.